this insurgency in northern Mozambique has been running for a while now. Would you say that it's escalating, or has it just become more public?
It is indeed escalating. We've seen an unprecedented level of attacks this year, which we had not seen last year. And the number of people fleeing the region, the number of people dying, the overall humanitarian conditions on the ground have worsened. So the conflict is certainly intensifying.
All right, does that mean that the militants are growing in number and strength?
They are certainly growing in strength. We've seen some huge attacks this year that we've never seen before. They've been able to take over cities. The city of Musambura, the Praia, for example, was completely locked down. The insurgents overran it. They've overrun other cities in the region. So Cabo Delgado in general is a no-go zone. Only Pemba is really surviving, which is the capital of the region, of the province. And that's the problem, which means that the insurgency has certainly gained intensity than we had last year, for example.
Why have they been allowed to grow and establish themselves in this way? Were the authorities not taking the matter seriously?
Peter, that's the question we are all asking. Why is it that we've seen this all over again in Africa? So it's not like Mozambique is the first incident. We wonder, why is it that when we see red, we want to call it blue, we want to call it white, we want to call it any other color except the real color. And that's the situation we've had with insurgency, terrorism especially, around the continent. We've seen that in Nigeria, we've seen that in Cameroon, we've seen that in many other places where leaders or the countries, the government have refused to call the terrorism. They prefer to call it by any other name except the real name. And then when it gets really worse, that's when they go around and say, yes, we are suffering from terrorism. But a year ago, they will refuse to call the insurgency terrorism. They will refuse to call the insurgency violent extremism. So it is an African playbook that we are seeing in northern Mozambique. The situation is intensifying now. We see the government going all over the world asking for help, of which in 2017, if the government would have made just a few tours around the region to ask for that help, I don't think that the insurgency will have grown to the level it is today. So we are partly responsible for the intensity of the violent extremism we see in northern Mozambique.
All right, so they warned South Africa to stay out, otherwise they would extend the front line beyond Mozambique's borders into South Africa. And SADC only met earlier this year for the first time to deal with this insurgency, but at this stage, it's still talks. Should SADC step up the game as a regional body and try and deal with this insurgency on the ground?
SADC should have done so long ago. SADC has a pact, the so-called Mutual Defense Pact, in which it says that an attack on one of the member states is a regional threat, which means it is an attack on all the member states. And they also go ahead to state that such an attack should be met immediately with collective action. So we don't know why in 2017, in 2018, in 2019, the insurgency in Mozambique has been raging, killing thousands of people, and yet SADC was unable to intervene. We know that SADC cannot do anything if Mozambique does not request, because of the whole thing about sovereignty, the sovereignty principle, which is what has kept SADC and many other organizations, such as the African Union, from having any real meaningful intervention in the situation. But all is not lost. As you have rightly stated, SADC met on 9th of May to consider the situation. They debated the issue. But nothing really conclusive came out of that meeting. So we believe that SADC is monitoring the situation. It is taking probably some action behind the scene, or at least planning for a major action to come, which, we hope that that action will mean, intervention in northern Mozambique. Because the way the situation is going, Peter, it is a regional problem. All the countries in the region, not only South Africa, are threatened by the insurgency in northern Mozambique. Don't it's in another country, it's in Zambia, it's in Mozambique, it is in Zimbabwe, or it is in Malawi. So all of these countries are threatened because we know that when the insurgency like this takes place in a country, the insurgents live in the neighboring countries. They use neighboring countries to mobilize resources, to mobilize funding, to plan for attacks, and all sort of other logistic need that they require to carry out the insurgency. So all the other countries in the region are perhaps being used, to plan or fuel the insurgency in northern Mozambique. But because of no studies, none of this government has really sat down to carry out, some investigation to evaluate the threat that terrorism poses to its country, so that we know exactly where these insurgents are and where they are not. That those investigations, those studies are still missing, and therefore we don't know what's really happening in the region. But we know that what is happening in northern Mozambique, it is a regional threat.
So left unchecked, and I don't want to scare our viewers, but could we start to see in southern Africa some of the things that we've seen in East Africa, countries like Kenya, where extremists literally plant bombs?
That's the next level. That's the next level, and it could happen. Look, if the situation in northern Mozambique is left unchecked, we cannot say it will not happen. The insurgents themselves have said it. If you go today to Cabo Delgado, I mean, many people will tell you the horror that they are facing, and it's even more than what you are describing there. I think what you are saying is that countries like South Africa may fall into some of these attacks, and this could happen, because especially if you look at South Africa, the fact that the Islamic State, which has now joined forces with the insurgents in northern Mozambique, and it's been very active. The Islamic State has recruited South Africans, some of which went to fight in Syria. There are South Africans within the ranks of the insurgency today in northern Mozambique. We know that there are sleeper cells in this country. So we can't take the threat that the Islamic State is posing to South Africa lightly. It is a threat that has to be taken seriously and met with definitive action.